Welcome to English for Engineers. I'm your host, Olivia Augustin. Join me on my podcast as I dig deep into all things technical English, business English, and international business communication to bring you a lifetime of knowledge in a digestible format. Today I'm happy to have my friend, communication specialist and polyglot Ama Zbarcea here with me again. During the last episode, the two of us started our conversation about the minefield of international business communication, or as we like to call it, lost in translation. Ama, thank you so much for coming to this podcast again.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
We finished the last episode with a kind of a cliffhanger, and I'd like to repeat the question that we left open last time. It's like previously on this show. Ama, I have another question for you. We both are really big fans of the book The Culture Map by Erin Meyer. We both love it. It's such a great book. It's such a great resource that helps you navigating the minefield of international business relations. And there's one example I read, and that example is the base for my next question. Let me paint the scene or paint a picture, set the scene for you. It's an international project. The engineers involved are German and Japanese. And due to the nature of different time zones, most communication is via email. The Japanese engineer has a question that he emails to his German counterpart. The German technician knows the answer and immediately replies, "Problem solved," you would think. The other way around, whenever the German guy has a question for his Japanese counterpart, it takes sometimes even up to a week until he gets a reply. And here's the trouble. Both of them assume that the other one is not doing their work properly or diligently. Why? Compared to Japan, Germany has an egalitarian culture, whereas what Japan is more hierarchical. Even if you know the solution to a problem, you go and double check with your boss, and that takes a day or two. So the longer response times are perceived by a German as slow, as not knowledgeable. The other way around, the fast response of the very knowledgeable German is perceived as hasty or lazy by his Japanese counterpart. A fast response means you did not check with your boss, which could mean you're A, lazy, or B, you don't respect your superiors. The problem is thus not a grammar problem, it's not a language problem, not even a technical problem. There was a cultural misinterpretation of behavior. They were lost in translation. So my question is for you, the question that I started, feels like 5 minutes ago, is there a difference between the US and the UK as how they handle projects and project communication?
Absolutely, that's the short answer. Surely there's this perception that time is money. Every single second, minute of the day is perceived as lost or gained money. So very much like the Germans, if you know the answer, you reply right away. In the business world, everyone expects a reply roughly within 24 hours, business hours. It's not uncommon for people to work on the weekends, work late nights. If a superior asks a question, you're meant to reply no matter what time of day it is or if you're having dinner. In the UK, there's a much more of a respect for work-life balance. The Americans would view it possibly as lazy or not motivated, or the European way to take time off, to have that separation, that balance. So there's a bit more respect for people not replying quickly. However, unlike the Japanese example that you gave, there's still very much of a give the answer as soon as you can, as soon as you're ready. If you know it, you don't have to check with people. Maybe slightly more of a team-focused approach in the UK. If you're not 100% sure, that you do check with your team or your superior or whoever. In the US, much more individualistic. If you know, you know. But again, that's cultural. Individualism is a big part of the U.S. culture. From a very young age, children in school are taught to raise their hand when they have the answer, and that means raise it high. And if you don't raise it high in an American school, you're penalized for that. You're told, well, you didn't raise your hand high enough. Your hand wasn't straight above your head touching the ceiling, essentially. In the UK, I didn't go to primary school in the UK, but I have a lot of friends with children here, and I've learned about it, and I've seen their behavior as adults in a room. What they do is they raise one finger on one hand, and it's close to their shoulder. It's very subtle. It's showing that they know, but they're not being in your face about it. They're not interrupting visually what's happening in the room. So you see a lot of that cultural difference in the way people are willing to be direct or interrupt in a meeting or share what they have to know. It's much more of, in the US, if somebody has something to say, they will volunteer it right away. They won't wait for somebody to ask them. They will, usually polite enough to wait for a break in the conversation. But if they think it needs to be said right away, they will interrupt. And it's not rudeness. It's directness or not wanting to be off track, or they don't want to waste time going down the wrong path because time is money. And in the UK, it's the complete opposite. They wait for that break to be asked to volunteer.
Oh, okay. Is it otherwise like showing off? Being rude and want to show off?
The Americans, you mean?
Would it be perceived as that from Americans in the US?
It's definitely not perceived among Americans as being rude or showing off. It's just part of what you do. However, other cultures may perceive it that way, and it's not wrong to perceive it that way, because in the context of your own culture, it seems that way. Mm-hmm. But it's really important to notice that somebody might be from a different culture, and you have to give some leniency, even if you don't understand why they're doing what they're doing.
And you don't always realize it in the first couple of seconds that someone comes from another cultural background. That's actually one of my problems. I have blonde hair, I live in the Netherlands, my spoken Dutch is, at least the first 5 minutes, quite good. So I mostly perceived as Dutch, and then all my mistakes come up a bit later. Not even not using proper Dutch words, but sometimes the same word in Dutch and German has a complete different meaning. And things can go horribly wrong. And now, 10 years later, I can laugh about it. But I had my fair share of putting my foot in my mouth, of being unintentionally rude. Yeah. Ama, we know each other for quite a while, and I know you have a funny story that popped into my mind when I used the word rude. Would you mind sharing?
Oh, sure. I mean, this goes to company cultures and cultural differences between countries as well. So I was in the office of this, the corporate headquarters just outside of London of a large multinational company. And I was working with this team quite regularly in the legal department. And one of the women that worked there, she was from Slovakia, but she hadn't been in the UK long, although she had worked all over the world. So definitely a worldly person, a very, very brilliant lawyer. And she was working on compliance. And one of the things that happened because of my role as an American on that team was that when it came time to deal with more difficult situations, confrontational things or resolving conflict, because the Brits are a little bit more conflict averse and they knew that I didn't have any problem with it, I usually got designated to be the bad person and deal with those conflicts, which gave me a lot of experience. But anyway, I'd be on the phone and I'd be quite direct with people and say, look, this needs to get done. I've never done it in a mean way, in a bad way. It's just, as an American, I have more experience with that direct confrontation, so I don't find it as intimidating. And this Slovakian woman sitting, in an open plan office, maybe 3 rows down, and it's relatively quiet, and she's heard me just get off the phone and solve a problem quite assertively, probably. I don't actually even remember what that was about. All I remember is hanging up the phone, and this woman from the other... I would say her name, but I'm afraid it might, I don't want people to look anyone up. So she turns around and she exclaims with such emotion, "Ama, I love you, you're so rude!" And I said, you can't say that. I almost said her name again. I said, I don't think you mean rude. I think you mean, assertive or a problem solver. Or, I don't remember how I said it to her, but, I don't think I was being rude. And I said, yeah. And she says, "No, I love you. You're so rude." She was so excited about it because she saw something in me. We didn't know each other that well at that time. We'd only been working together a few weeks. But she saw something in me that she saw possibly from her Eastern European culture, that more directness, assertiveness, which maybe she was missing in her British colleagues. And she was so excited, and it was meant as a compliment. She really liked my style, right, to get things done. But she said it maybe 3 or 4 times, and she's shouting it in this office because she's just a loud, exuberant person. I said, you need to be careful about saying that, because, people might think I'm rude, and that's bad for my reputation, because rudeness is taken very, very seriously in British culture.
Okay. So how do you make your way back if you have been rude, or have you just lost?
You have to first.
It's over now, though.
It's possible that you've just lost. First impressions do matter. But at the same time, first you have to recognize that someone did perceive you as rude, which is not as easy as it sounds. Sometimes you just don't know. Like we were talking about raising your hand really, or interrupting. Sometimes it's just so natural in your culture that you don't realize other people perceived you as rude. But if you do notice that somebody thought you were rude, or if maybe just something feels off, you can wait until emotions might die down a little bit, not do it right away, and approach that person in a casual setting, or just give them a casual phone call, whatever, and say, look, this is what happened. I said these things, and I felt something was off in our relationship afterward, or something didn't feel right. I'm not sure if I misinterpreted it, but I want you to know that from my perspective, I was not trying to be rude, mean, whatever the case may be. And if you saw it that way, I apologize for hurting your feelings or interrupting the project, or whatever the effect might have been. So I didn't mean for anything to go in that direction. I apologize if it did. This is part of who I am and how I approach things. If it's a problem, can you please discuss it with me? And sometimes you do that in writing to give them a chance to absorb that information and come back to you. And sometimes you do it in person over a coffee. It really depends on the relationship you have with that person, and who it is, and whether it's superior, and what culture you're in, and what culture they're from. You have to feel it out, because relationships are important in business, whether it's your colleague or the person you're sitting across from a negotiation table from. It really, really does matter.
As an Austrian married to a German living in the Netherlands, I have learned that it does help to have that one friend or one colleague that you can ask to educate you about cultural differences. That you can say, hey, look, please help me to find my way around here. And if I say something stupid, if I make an unfortunate gesture, let me know. Let me know and tell me. Don't just think, she's weird. Give me some feedback on everything, about everything you think might be slightly off. That helps a lot, if you have the luxury of having an honest and open person close to you.
It is a luxury to have, and some cultures are more closed to giving that sort of feedback than others. I mean, I've worked on projects all over the world. I've worked with a lot of Chinese people in Chinese departments of a multinational. Obviously, you have subsidiaries all around the world, and I've tried to ask for that sort of feedback, and fortunately or unfortunately, it's part of their culture that even if they say yes, they still won't, because it might be taken the wrong way, or hurt your feelings, or they might feel it's rude. They have that cultural barrier where they don't feel comfortable doing that. And that's just part of life. Yeah, but I have a funny story actually. Since you mentioned asking people for guidance and feedback, when I first came to the UK as a student intern, I was very, very fortunate that the general counsel, so the head of the legal department of this huge company I was working for, came to escort me to the office on the first day. And we were on the train, and as a young 19-year-old in my first corporate job, and the first time working in a foreign country, I'd traveled a bit, but I'd never worked anywhere else. I'd actually never worked in a corporate office at all. And I asked him for some advice. I said, look, do you have any advice for someone starting out, especially in a foreign country, cultural differences and so on? And he said, yes. And this man, he is incredibly nice, incredibly generous with his time, but for someone in such a senior position, he turned bright red as he's telling me. He said, if somebody asks you for a rubber, it doesn't mean what you think it does. It's an eraser. I swear it's an eraser. So a rubber in American generally means a condom. It also means it means the material rubber, but if you say a rubber in casual conversation, it means condom, which is probably not appropriate for the workplace. But in British English, it simply means an eraser for pencil on a paper.
To erase what you've written.
Yes, to erase what you have written. So yes, that was his first piece of advice, and the second one he said also, don't say pants. pants or underwear. Pants or underwear. He says, say trousers. Yes, and funny enough, I mean, I took that to heart. I memorized the words rubber and trousers, and I repeated them in my head for the rest of the hour train ride to the office. And of course, in the first 2 weeks, I must have said pants about 13 times. And I immediately corrected myself, and, people giggled a few times, but, I'd say, oh, I meant trousers. But they understand, people understand. And thankfully for me, as an American, people watch a lot of American films, movies, right? So they're more familiar with American culture, American slang, so they might know what pants are. The other way around might be a little bit more difficult, but either way, people are people.
People are people, true. That is actually one of the things I always tell my students or my clients when they ask me, Olivia, what English should we learn? Which one is the better, British English or American English, if you have to learn one anyway? And I always say the luxury of a non-native speaker is we can choose. And we could even mix and match them sometimes. But if you do, you have to be careful. And the example you gave is just perfect, really, really perfect. You can mix and match as a foreigner, but be careful and do some research. But it tells you a lot about culture. Maybe that's another podcast, Ama, the culture of cursing. When I think of your boss who picked you up, and even before giving you the advice regarding the two words eraser and rubber, he blushed. He turned completely red as a grown-up man. He didn't even want to talk about that. He even didn't want to use the word rubber. Yeah, I'd love to invite you back on another podcast about the culture of swear words, or as I like to call them, the no-go words. Because in some European countries, even on the workplace, it's so common, even normal to use, funny enough, the English expressions. In Austria and Germany, they use a lot of English swear words, and that's perceived less, what's the word? I don't want to say impolite, it's tolerated more than the German equivalent. Sounds softer, even, funny enough.
I've heard that a lot, but I never understood why.
Me neither, actually, never understood why. Maybe because it's a foreign word, it has another impact, different way, the loade. Sometimes when they have projects with an international team, they just go on using that language, but it's plain rude. You cannot do that. And sometimes I have to admit I have a hard time to explain that to German-speaking engineers. But that's a topic for another hour-long podcast.
Something like that. I'm sure I could find you plenty of embarrassing stories about all sorts of words. And yes, I think the use of swear words in the workplace is probably a big topic on its own.
Yeah, definitely. So what's your advice to be on the safe side?
The best thing I can always say to people is know your audience. If you know who's in the room, you can gauge the reactions a little bit better, and read The Culture Map by Erin Meyer. I feel like I'm her publicist or something. I read it later than I should have. I didn't know about it, but I wish I'd read it sooner, because a lot of things were explained by the example she used in that book. And I understood a lot of things that happened in my past corporate life a lot better later. But yeah, just know your audience, and don't take yourself too seriously. People make mistakes, and that's okay, and just, recover from them, and speak to people if you think you did something wrong, or even if you didn't, just check in.
That's a really good advice. Mine would be just don't use it. Just totally don't use it until you know your audience, and even then, don't.
Well, yes, of course, but we all slip up when it comes naturally in our sentences, and, things happen.
True. Wow, we covered quite a lot today, but I think we should wrap it up now. Is there anything else you want to say? Did I forget anything, maybe?
I think you had a question for me earlier that I interrupted. Is that right?
Yes, I do. So a lot of my engineers have to read some contracts and are struggling their way through those English contracts. And you're such a generous person. I know you've created a freebie that is taking care of some of the troubles that they might encounter. And I want you to ask, would you mind sharing your resource with my engineers?
Oh, absolutely. So my website is called onyourownterms.net. And if you go to this website, onyourownterms.net/contract cheat sheet, you can download for free a little cheat sheet I've put together that explains the simple, most common terms for a contract in simple English for business people, not for lawyers. Now, for your engineers, they might see that it's geared a little bit more towards people who are business owners, but it is absolutely useful for anyone who needs to read a contract and understand it quickly. So I hope that they find it useful. If you just go to the front page as well, they'll find the link right there on the front page if they can't remember the full URL.
And I'll make sure to put the link into the podcast transcript. Thank you so much, Ama.
I'm really glad that you can do that, and that, I might be able to help some of your engineers as well. But before we go, I think you have something that might be useful to all of my small business owners as well. I know you teach mainly to engineers, and English for engineers is your tagline sort of, but you teach English to a lot of different people who have structured thinking, don't you?
Yes, absolutely. That's the main thing with engineers, actually. They are solution orientated and very, very structured indeed.
And I think that certainly describes small business owners. So for any of my audience that are small business owners who have English as a second language or are based in a non-English native speaking country, I think they could so benefit from some of your expertise as well. And I think you offer some free resources that would really benefit them. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Of course. I think the one resource they would profit the most, it's called How to Boost Your Email Writing Skills. Because even though I work with engineers, big part of doing business is about communication with clients, with subcontractors, all the different stakeholders, and just getting your message along. And I've put together that free resource, and it's about how to write eloquent and structured emails. And it does not only teach you a simple structure that you can use for emails in any language, it also helps you to find the right tone for your emails. And if you're in a hurry, you can just use that PDF and copy and paste useful phrases and sentences and use them in your business communication. Yeah, and I'm really happy to share with you all. The name of my website is marcode.org. So you look up marcode.org/linktree. And there you find this and other freebies. Feel free to use it because it's a simple structure and it just makes communication so much easier.
Wow, I think that could benefit a lot of people, and maybe not just non-native speakers. I think all of us could have used that when we first started writing business emails. And it fits so well with what we talked about communication today. So thank you again so much, Olivia. It's been amazing talking to you, and I hope we can do this again soon. But in the meantime, I will say goodbye for now.
Thank you so much, Ama. I had a blast doing these 2 episodes with you. And that was it for today, my friends. This was, once again, English for Engineers. I'm your host, Olivia Augustin. Talk to you soon.